Okay, hi, welcome. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the Senchofin and Hulkaminam speaking peoples on whose territory the Southern Gulf Islands exist. The CRD is working to be increasingly mindful of its commitment to more inclusive governance with our neighbors. So specifically, we acknowledge the neighboring First Nation governments whom we are committed to building stronger working relationships, especially the Sakum, Sartlet, the Sayout, the Pocatchin, the Malahat, and the Penelakut tribe, and also the unaffiliated First Nations people living on the Southern Gulf Islands. So my name is Justine Stark. I'm the manager of service delivery for the Southern Gulf Islands, and we're here in this Zoom session today to talk about Southern Gulf Islands transportation integration, and specifically an active transportation component, in order to help residents and people watching this video understand some of the challenges in developing safe walking and cycling routes and the opportunities that this project presents to address those. So we've been working on this project since the spring of 2021, and we've had meetings with local experts from each of the islands. Today, we have a small subset of our active transportation advisory group with a representative from each island, and they're going to introduce themselves in a second. Actually, I should let you know, we've heard regrets from the Mayne Islands Pathways and Trails Association. So both Irene Barrett and Jane Worley were unable to join us at the last minute, unfortunately. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Peter Parry from Pender Island to introduce himself.
Good morning. My name is Peter Parry. I'm with Moving Around Pender on Pender Island, and also a member of an organization called Gulf Island Trail Society, where the 4 Gulf Islands, including Salt Spring actually, have banded together to get some liability insurance when we get trails on private land. So I'll turn it over to the next person, who is Charlene, I think.
Hi, I'm Charlene. I represent Galiano Island Parks and Recreation Commission, and we oversee the shore access and trails on CRD and MODI right-of-ways on the island. I'll pass it along to the next person.
Bowie Kiefer. That might be me, or is that's you, Paul?
That's you, Bowie.
Oh, well, it'll be me then. I'm Bowie Kiefer, and I'm with the Galiano Trail Society. We build trail and manage trails on private properties with the cooperation of generous landowners. And also we build trails on some of the provincial parkland in collaboration with BC Parks. And the trails we're concerned with include hiking trails, and some trails are on old forestry roads and thus usable by mountain bikes and horses. Over to the next.
And that would be me. Hi, I'm Paul Brent. I'm with the Saturna Island Parks and Recreation Commission. And like Charlene, we're responsible for a number of beach accesses and parks, as well as a few trails on the island. We do our very best within the limits of our mandate to support active transportation in any way that we can. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. And as you know, we've been engaging the community on the subject of a transportation function for the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area. And we do have some preliminary results from our Get Involved website, which is showing us what we kind of already knew, is overwhelmingly people don't feel the roads are safe enough for cyclists and pedestrians. We're using language, walking and rolling. So also to think about people with strollers and people in wheelchairs don't feel safe on the roads. And most people say they would cycle, walk, or roll more if there were bike lanes or designated sidewalks or safe shoulders. But it's important to understand jurisdiction, and I know this is something you're all familiar with, that on the islands, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure is responsible for roads and road upgrades. They use a contractor to do those upgrades. But if we want to have a path within the road right-of-way, we need to have a permit or a license of occupation from the ministry. And what we're hearing, though, I think this is a departure from the way it's been in the past, but what we're hearing is the ministry is preferring to issue licenses of occupations to other levels of government. So we've been requested on occasion by some folks in the community to hold those licenses of occupation for a trail organization. And without a transportation function established specifically for that purpose, we're not able to do that unless it's a partnership with one of the local parks commissions. So we are talking about transportation corridors here, and I know that that a lot of you are working to build trails on your islands, and the goal is a lot of recreation and recreational trails. And so we're interested in where recreational trails might be useful from a transportation perspective to help people get from A to B in their day. So the other thing that I want to explain is that the CRD is a big organization and it has different service divisions within it. So most people are probably familiar with the Gulf Islands Regional Trail Plan, which is a CRD regional parks project, and it's guided by broader regional priorities for the CRD. Its goal is to build a spine trail across all of the islands, and the first leg of that is under development on Mayne Island between Village Bay and Miners Bay. But the full build out of this plan is going to take decades. And so we're not going to be seeing any rapid implementation of the regional trail plan. What we're talking about here is bringing a local function for the Southern Gulf Islands so we can implement local priorities for walking and cycling paths that would likely be guided by a transportation commission, which would be made up of local representatives. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to the group to outline some of the challenges in terms of realizing the active transportation goals and just in challenges with building trails on the islands. And so we'll start with Charlene from Galiano. Go ahead, Charlene.
Well, I see that one of the challenges that we have is just capacity to build all the trails and maintain everything that we'd all love to have. I'm a cyclist and I'm a walker and a sort of jogger, and certainly for me it would be benefit to have an opportunity to run and walk alongside the road. And currently the Parks and Rec, that wouldn't be we're such a small group of folks, and we only have a small pot of money. And the more you build, the more it costs to maintain. And also, I don't know about the other islands, but here sometimes it's hard to find the staff or the support to even pay people to support these kind of initiatives. So those would be some of our concerns would be just capacity to maintain them, build them, and support people using them.
Okay, well, maybe I'll jump in. As Charlene said, there is on all of these islands a fairly extensive network of recreational trails. On Pender, we have some fantastic trails that usually are beach access trails, but they're built for recreational purposes. There are no bikes allowed, for one thing. And they don't get you from point A to point B to any of the key island locations for services like shopping or the health center. So they're a wonderful asset, but actually people drive their cars and park them at these trailheads. So they certainly don't serve the purpose of decreasing our carbon footprint. What MAP has been interested in is getting transportation trails, getting people between services, the community center, the driftwood, the school. You know, it's paradoxical that here we are in a rural setting and no children bike because it is unsafe. And all the surveys that we've done and the one that we've just heard about from Justine and Emma, the chief concern about island residents about walking or cycling is safety. Our roads are just too narrow and people just don't feel safe enough, and justifiably. there's corners, there's blind spots, and it is completely unsafe certainly for children to bicycle to school or virtually anywhere. So, I think that's been our challenge. So we've resorted to asking landowners to have construct trails on their private land. And this has worked well to some extent, but of course it's not a permanent arrangement. And so although some very community-minded citizens have allowed us to build trails on their property along roads, this is not a permanent solution because our agreement with them and the insurance that we got to cover them only covers them while that property owner agrees to it. So the government, CRD and any other level of government isn't going to contribute money for infrastructure to keep these trails up if they're potentially the agreements are revocable and only last while the landowner wants them. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. And I think that's why we need a service under the CRD to enable us to work on these things. So I'll turn it over. I think the next person is Bowie. Thank you.
Well, fine. I'll pick up from there. Possibly there's a way of finding some incentives, for example, tax incentives, as we have for natural area protection. There might be some incentives to encourage trails to be actually made permanent on private property. And otherwise we have to rely on generosity, which we are certainly getting from a lot of people. The problem I would like to flag is that of the fact that the CRD does build very high quality trails, such as around Ganges and now under construction on Mayne Island. And these are built to a highly engineered standard, and they are very costly, and they take a long time to cover relatively short distances in terms of actually extending over a large fraction of our road system. Presently only over a very minor fraction. And what we need is to find some way of debottlenecking that. And at one level, for example, along the roadways, small footpaths can be built by volunteers, as we did with the Sturdy's Bay Trail on Galiano. And I think we have some other opportunities where footpaths could be built very, very easy to build, wriggling along by the power poles on the side of the road. And then when we need higher quality multi-use trails, that if we could find some ways of partnerships, for example, having volunteer construction of some trails. I'm thinking of these on Galiano Island in our village area. We have no multi-use trails whatsoever on the sides of the roads, and perhaps some of that could be accelerated by having donations of services, gravel and of construction, and then on the other hand, reaching to the provincial government for a partnership to where in places power poles need to be moved, and perhaps the road itself, from one area on Sturdy's Bay Road, the road itself would have to be moved to make room for a multi-use trail. And that can be done. It simply requires the commitments at different levels of government. And I'm suggesting that we partner one way with volunteers and partner another way with the provincial government to get these things to happen.
Okay, I guess I'm up next, Paul Brent. So everything you've heard so far is certainly the kind of challenges that we have on Saturna Island. And, as islanders, we can be very creative, and we have been very creative. And I look to Galiano for probably being the most creative in terms of how they've created a very, very extensive trail network. But I think we're going to need to be creative as well in terms of government. That's why I believe that we need a service. We're creative on Saturna Island in terms of trying to support this by a little bit of integration between our community shuttle service and getting people to and from they want to go, including a lot of hikers. So we have bottlenecks at the ferry, which is a difficult spot when people are coming off to hike and or bike or whatever on our islands, which is very popular during the summer. And so we encourage cyclists to wait until the ferry traffic, the vehicular traffic has moved on. We also provide a service whereby we will take people and their bicycles, particularly families, in our shuttle. With a trailer, we can carry bicycles. We also carry hikers to end destination points and pick them back up so that they avoid some of the dangerous roadways. I think we need to also be across all islands, very tactical about where we invest our dollars and to deal with those areas that are the most critical. And that would be like Peter Parry of Pender Island said, getting children to the schools from high density areas like Magic Lake. So we have to be very, very strategic with the dollars we have. And one of the ways we can be strategic is by having CRD create a service, provide grant funding for island organizations who know how to get things done cost effectively, far more cost effectively. And also we're going to have to work with various levels of government like Bowie is talking about. But we have to get on it, and we have to get on it soon in an integrated way. And one of the ways we're going to do that more effectively is if we have a transportation service at the CRD that can hold licenses of occupation, get grants for island communities to work on this type of active transportation. And that is it for me.
Okay. Well, another motivation to develop active transport mechanisms on the islands is to fulfill our mandates for climate change. As you know, both the CRD and the Island Trust have declared climate emergencies, and they've sort of asked the islands to reduce their carbon footprint. Well, our carbon footprint is totally related to transportation. So the only way we can reduce our carbon footprint, or almost the only way, is by increasing active transport and public transportation. So, and there are opportunities to get funding for these mechanisms, but as little nonprofits, we are often not eligible to apply. So having a CRD transportation service and commission, which will have the ability to apply for infrastructure funding, I think will facilitate our ability to achieve a reduction in emissions on the island.
Okay, great, thank you. Charlene, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just said I wanted to also report that from our community, from Parks and Rec, what I've been hearing was when they heard about this consultation process was a concern that they didn't want this, like if we're going to put shoulders on the roads make sure that those kind of improvements reflect the communities, reflect the rural community. So they weren't looking for large paved shoulders so that it looks like they're back in the city. But it's certainly, we need something to keep people safe, especially if they're, families using strollers, or we've got someone in a wheelchair, or certainly for our biking community, so that we don't have people three abreast riding up the road, and around a corner comes a car. So just to keep people safe, but also again to just reflect the rural nature of our communities as well. It was an issue that was brought forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so many things that I've heard you all talk about are raising ideas for me. Salt Spring Island there is an example on Salt Spring Island where they have a transportation commission. It's a CRD commission, and they have a partnership agreement with the local trail society. And this Partners Creating Pathways is the old name. I think it's called Island Pathways these days, but they build the trails using their volunteers in an arrangement that they have with the CRD. And so we could do something similar. When you're talking about road standards, it depends on what kind of path you're building. We know how expensive it is to build, separated bike lanes as part of the road base. But I really see a phased approach to starting with walking paths and making sure that pedestrians are safe on the side of the road, and educating drivers and educating cyclists about how to share the road more safely. And when we can access infrastructure grants from higher levels of government, we do so. Right now, CRD doesn't have the purpose set up. We don't have a transportation function or a service to be able to go after this bigger money that the feds sometimes offer. And when each of your trail groups try to apply for that, then you're in competition with each other. We know that regional applications with regional impact have better success with the federal and provincial grant programs. So that's definitely a function I see setting up in the service if we do go to establish this kind of a transportation service, as well as creating a granting program to be able to have the CRD offer trail groups operating grants. As Paul was mentioning, I think that's something we've heard, that you really could use some operating funding, and it makes sense for the CRD to get out of the way when it doesn't make sense for the CRD to be doing something, but then to enable implementation of any kind of an active transportation plan by being able to hold a license of occupation if that's needed, by being able to go after federal grants and be able to offer some funding to the local trail groups that are doing the good work on the islands. So I guess the only other thing I wanted to touch on is we do hear concerns sometimes about why is the CRD doing another study, but this is clearly a process about implementation. It's something I really want to emphasize, because we've had a lot of previous studies and a lot of requests from the community for some solutions with transportation in the Southern Gulf Islands. And people think the CRD can just fund projects, but there's rules that prevent regional districts from using money that's collected for one purpose for a purpose that it wasn't collected for. So if the community wants the CRD to pursue active transportation locally, we need to establish a service and collect funds specifically for that purpose. So that's kind of it for what I think I wanted to say. Is there anything else that people want to say? What are we missing here?
I'm just going to elaborate perhaps on something you said, Justine. Is I believe it's in Victoria. They have it's almost a dedicated bike lane in certain areas where bikes seem to have the right of way, and it might be something to explore on our islands, particularly in the interim, in particularly dangerous spots that we might discuss CRD, discuss with Ministry of Transport, the ability to have certain sections designated as bikes having right of way over cars, such that we won't have cars trying to pass or do other things lest they face fines. And so on an interim basis, that might be something that the CRD could well spearhead with the type of transportation service we're talking about to get things safer without significant expenditure and doing it quickly. Thanks.
That's a really interesting idea. Yield to cyclists. Yeah, I haven't heard that one before, and it's so great to bring all of you guys together. I always learn so much from Islanders, and really important that this is an initiative that was requested by the community, and we're talking to the community and wanting feedback to be able to present something that's going to meet community needs and be right sized for the Southern Gulf Islands. And so on that note, if you haven't filled out a survey on the Get Involved website, please do so. Please tell your friends to do so. We want to make sure as many voices are heard in this process. And thank you so much for jumping on and having this conversation today, and for all the good work you do on your islands. With that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you.